Hello, and welcome to a podcast on mental health in younger people as part of Youth Mental Health Day, which happens this year on the 19th of September. It's one of a series of podcasts with RCS. My name is Vanessa Trimble, and I'm the Business Engagement Manager at RCS. And I am delighted today to be joined by Chartered Psychologist Dr. Beverly Taylor. Today, we are focusing on younger people's mental health in the workplace. Hi, Dr. Bev. How are you today?
Hi, Vanessa. I'm brilliant, thank you. I'm really excited to join this session today with you. I think it's something that is so important for us to get into in today's society is mental health in young people.
Yeah, absolutely. There does seem to be much more of a prevalence in society around mental health with younger people. And I know that Youth Mental Health Day is about encouraging understanding and discussion of mental health in young people, enabling them to live happier and healthier lives all year round. I know each year the day aims to get young people and those who support them talking more about mental health and to improve their mental health.
Yeah, I think it's not surprising, really, isn't it, when we think of all that our young people have been through in this last kind of 5+ years. We've had COVID, which, if you were kind of growing up and at that point where actually the isolation impacted on you greatest because you weren't around your friends so much during those years. And then we've got all the social media that we have now. We know more about the things that are going on in the world, don't we, than we did certainly when I was young, and things are much more accessible. And so I think they just have much more going on. And then as well, like in terms of the working world, that's changed so much, hasn't it?
Mm.
And when I was young, my first time at work, I was in an office, I was surrounded by other people day in, day out, learning from them, where we're not doing that so much now. So it's got a greater impact, I think, on our young people than ever before.
Yeah. And how do you think the conversation around mental health has changed, particularly among young employees? How's that changed over the last decade or so?
Well, I think it's much more open now, which is good. I think we've got much more conversations kind of going, but I think there still is this pressure to hide it and things at work. We having that expectation that you can just get on with things and you'll handle whatever's thrown at you, and you don't always want to speak up to you when something's new or you're tackling something for the first time or you're finding something a wee bit difficult. You don't always want to make that known. Um, and so I think there's still like this kind of need to cover it up. Whereas actually, from what we know from the psychology, when we're trying to hide those symptoms and how we're really feeling at work, it takes us away from work. It's kind of like a double whammy there, because not only are we less productive because we're struggling with our mental health, but having to hide those symptoms and pretend everything's okay means that we have less mental bandwidth to do the
Mm.
complex tasks that we need to do. So then it's even kind of worse in a way. Um, so I think this, I love the fact that we've got this kind of awareness day that can support our young people and can make it okay. And I think having that spotlight on it within companies and within companies like RCS so that we can bring this to the fore is really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great that we've got this opportunity, as you say, to talk about it today. So what would you say are the main challenges? And you talked a couple of times about
Mhm.
symptoms. So some of the main challenges younger people in the workforce are facing, and also what might we look out for as employers?
So I think there's definitely a lot of anxiety, isn't there, and kind of mood related issues as you'd expect with mental health. Um, because obviously we've been, like I say, through COVID, we've got the war's kind of been going on for a few years. We've got all this social media kind of attention and things now as well. Um, and so I suppose a lot of people a lot of our young people are feeling more anxious and more negative than they maybe were pre-COVID, than our young people at the same age would have been pre-COVID. And that's often because what happened in COVID is that for all of us, we were kind of we were listening to more negative and scary messaging day in, day out, which activates that amygdala in our brains. So our amygdala is very, very good at keeping us safe. It's always scanning the horizon and kind of what's going on out there in social media, in the news, you know, and in all our kind of day-to-day conversations. and checking for things that could be threatening or emotionally scarring for us. And so because of the things we've been through over the last 5 or 10 years, that's kind of switched on and heightened in many people. And so it means that we're more adept to finding the negative stuff. We're more adept to feeling the anxiety and the fear than we would have been maybe for our same age 10 years ago. We're kind of much more kind of switched on to that. And so I think the main kind of challenges are to recognize when we're feeling that kind of low mood and anxiety, but then also then, okay, so I'm feeling that. What do I do about it now? Now that I know that I'm feeling it. So one thing is to become more aware of it, but the second thing is then what do we do about it? So I think as employers, just being aware that young people coming into our companies now might need a bit of support around that. So maybe buddy them up together, or have a workplace buddy who's a bit more experienced, who's kind of maybe been there a year or two, or kind of been where they were, to kind of support them through that environment. But also, like, I don't know what it was like for you, Vanessa, when you first did job interviews and went into the world of work, but I used to have to go into an office and be interviewed, and you'd meet people and do that face-to-face stuff. Sometimes our young people are meeting people for the first time face-to-face when they're actually first day on the job, or even sometimes months into a job if it's a part remote working. And so I think gathering occasions where whole teams can come together and it's not really threatening, and things, maybe social occasions, or maybe like having away days or like whole team kind of social events where you come together, you do a bit of conversational chat, and you do some learning and collaborating and supporting at the same time, I think really helps to embed those young workers, particularly if we're in that remote kind of working world.
I think that's really useful. I think
Yeah,
also what is important is finding out about the individuals, in
exactly.
terms of who they are, what they like doing. I know they've had the interview, a little bit about why they've applied for the role, but what their particular interests are, what is it they want to do more of in the role, and maybe some of their career aspirations, and also in particular their needs.
Yeah.
What is it you can do as an employer, and how is it you can manage their workload so that they are feeling they're not overwhelmed, they're feeling kind of in control and so on, and that they know that they can chat with you, that you care about them, and that they can have conversations about how they're feeling and what would be helpful in certain situations.
Exactly. And I think when you're talking to them about things like that, making that okay as well, share your needs with us. Or if you don't know your needs, because maybe it's your first time in the working world, working with them to kind of, explore what that might feel like. Particularly if you've got quite a flexible working environment, they might not know if they're better at working in the mornings or the evenings or after lunch, or how that kind of fits with their kind of lifestyle and the way that their creative brain works. So it might be that some of that is just helping them to understand that in your working culture, it's okay to work out what your needs are. But once you've got that kind of information, that again, okay to share that with your team and kind of get the best out of it.
Yeah, and it sounds like that in terms of open communication,
Yeah.
come and share. You can tell me anything that's going to be helpful for you, and having that kind of culture and fostering a culture that is very much supportive, encouraging, and wanting them to feel good in the workplace, which will obviously enable them to do better work in the end, won't you know?
Yes, exactly. Because if we feel good and we're in that environment where we are supported rather than that blame culture, then we're more likely again to have that mental bandwidth to take on more things because we're not always worrying. Again, I remember some of my less supportive workplaces, particularly when I was younger. If you made a mistake, you then worried it to death and you didn't want to share it, did you? Because you knew you were going to get into trouble and get told off about it, and you should have known better. And so maybe you try and hide it, or maybe, and part of becoming a professional was to learn how to own up to those mistakes and to do that in the right way. But equally, having that environment where that's okay to make mistakes, particularly when you're new, and you're learning something for the first time, is great. So having somebody there who's as supportive role model or a manager who's been, who knows how the day-to-day tasks work and the procedures and things in your workplace work, so they can support you through that the first few times you have to do that, so that if there is mistakes, there's somebody to support you and rectify them in the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to think that we've come a long way from the
Yeah.
blame culture,
Oh,
and that it
yes.
is a supportive learning environment for all individuals. Because,
Yeah.
it's mistakes are, I suppose, important in the workplace. It's part of the learning, and to be able to say, hey, I'm not sure, or I think I've made a mistake. There's always good learning from the vast majority of mistakes that we make. All good key learning. You've talked a little bit about anxiety. Are there other symptoms? I'm thinking more around the stress and potentially depression that we can look out for.
Yes, exactly. So obviously, when somebody's stressed, you might see that they kind of don't handle feedback as well, or maybe they withdraw into themselves if they're quite an open person normally, or it might just be that you kind of see that they're becoming more defensive, so you're trying to give them feedback, or you're trying to support them and they're becoming defensive and kind of closed in. Or it might go the other way and they try and do everything. You ever worked with somebody, Vanessa, who just like when they get stressed, they just tend to work harder and harder and harder, and then all of a sudden you kind of see them start to almost like go like a pressure cooker and things. And those are the kind of times where we want to step in and kind of see how we can help them to take a little bit off their plate, and also, to support them how to do that a wee bit better, in terms of having good self-care behaviors. And I think all of these things, if we as more experienced employees can demonstrate those good behaviors, so, say we've got a big deadline coming up, not sitting and working through the lunch break and all the way up to this deadline, but taking those appropriate breaks, because we know that for our brains, actually, we work more efficiently when we come back after a break than if we just try and push ourselves really hard and work through it. So if we're demonstrating those healthy behaviors, then that will also help people, younger workers within the kind of environment as well. But yeah, we can definitely be looking out for those kind of stress behaviors. Maybe somebody who, when they first start with you, goes for a walk every lunchtime, and then you notice that they're sitting at their desk working through emails instead. Or somebody who maybe is quite health foodie and then starts to eat more the junk food. Or maybe they're just starting to pick up on more unhealthy behaviors at work, like I say, working through the breaks, pushing themselves too hard. Similarly, if you've got somebody who is struggling with the mood issues in the workplace, again, you might find that they just start to withdraw a little bit. There might have been somebody who wanted to do all the interesting, complex tasks when they first joined and wanted to get involved in everything because it was all learning, and all of a sudden they're starting to shrink back and go, no, actually, I don't want anything else on my plate, or being quieter in meetings and things. So I think those typical kind of behaviors of kind of in a meeting, making sure you're getting feedback from everybody in the room and giving people space to talk, having more noisier people kind of step back a wee bit so that those other people can kind of come forward with their ideas as well. All those sorts of supported behaviors that we would
They're
expect.
really good examples, for people to pick up on, where there may be, something not quite right with that individual.
Yeah.
I think also particularly in the early days as well, it's important for me, perhaps, as somebody who works in an organization that is very much around, focuses on well-being, that we look after one another. It's very much a collaborative approach. And I think the examples you gave, are really useful tips and techniques for people, or, things to look for. Also, when you mentioned about, demonstrating good behaviors, being a role model for well-being, taking lunch breaks, and demonstrating that, you're leading by example, you're leaving work on time. They're all really useful cues for people to pick up on, particularly new to an organization.
Yeah, I think so. I think the most powerful messages I've had through my career was when more senior members or experienced members talked about who'd had mental health problems, and they'd come back into the workplace, talking about their experiences and how it felt and what they did and what their journey has been like, they've been the most powerful to me, because if a senior person can stand up and be very vulnerable and share what they've done and how actually the organization supported them and they've kind of worked through things and they're now in a better space, then it makes it okay, doesn't it, for then you as somebody who's not so experienced or maybe a bit more junior to do the same things. Similarly, I always found, again, that the more tricky workplaces I've been in is where, when we're not leaving work on time. And obviously, as you get more experienced and more responsibilities in life, often you do because you have to. So when you've got young children, often you have to leave work at a certain time because you've got responsibilities to pick them up from a childcare provider or from school or whatever. Whereas when you're younger, it can feel like, oh, well, there's no stop point. There's no natural kind of stop point, because if, the person that sits on the desk next to you is still in the office, well, maybe I should be too, because, and maybe that's the way you get promoted and recognized and all that kind of thing. So then it can lead to those unhealthy behaviors kind of creeping in. So I think, again, a great powerful example was when the senior manager, on his way out of the office, walked through the main office floor and would just check, what are you still doing here? Does this need to be done now? Can it wait till the morning? Can I get you some extra support on that in the morning if that's something that's got a strict deadline or something coming up? And kind of making sure that people aren't then staying till silly o'clock at night and kind of burning themselves out that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And you think when you join an organization, you do observe
Yes.
very closely what other people are doing and their particular behaviour. So yeah, that's important. But as managers, what kind of training would you recommend that we undertake in order to ensure that we are supporting younger people in the workplace as best as we possibly can?
So I think anything that you get involved with, like so anything in terms of building resilience for yourself, but also recommending that to younger employees to go on, to build resilience for better mental health. But equally, anything around sensitive conversations, so having sensitive conversations, mental health awareness, anything around that, or the mental health first aid or kind of mental health champions type training. I think mental health awareness is really key, because it helps you to spot those behaviours that you might not really pick up on, particularly when somebody's new. You might not really always pick up on behaviours, because often we're looking for a change, aren't we? Well, if somebody's new, you might not see a change because you're still learning who they are and kind of what's kind of going on with them. So yeah, I think anything around those sorts of things would be really useful for a manager to be aware of, so that you can support somebody in the right way and start those conversations off in the right way, again from that no blame perspective. But how can we support you, because it might be that somebody's picked up on a task but doesn't know the most efficient way to do it, so they're taking a lot longer than you might anticipate. So again, coming not from the why is this taking you so long, but from the, so how are you doing this, and how, let's work out the best way to do this that kind of maybe uses tech or something that you can train them on that would support them.
Yeah, one of the most popular training programs that we deliver is something called Wellbeing Champions.
Yes.
And we've trained over 300 now throughout the whole of Wales, and that's great to see, because they're kind of spreading the word. They're the ambassadors for wellbeing in the workplace, and they're people that in organizations other people can go to, if they need signposting, if they want to chat about any issues relating to their well-being. So I'd like to think that in every company there is a wellbeing champion, or there's a wellbeing lead potentially that you don't necessarily need to have the answers to in terms of specific questions, but that you can signpost people on and get more information to learn about specific issues.
Yeah, I agree. I think I've been through some of those training programs and helped kind of train on some of them myself, and I think they're brilliant. Particularly if they if that's somebody sat within the organization as well, because they can also influence the culture, but they can signpost maybe to other services within the organization or outside the organization if that's better, so that person can get support, and in the best way that works for them, things as well within the policies of the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. Because traditionally, and I am speaking and talking about a long time ago, but traditionally through occupational health and through HR, you'd get information when I first started work, but it was very limited. I think there's a lot more information and support available now. How can we start to maybe decrease the stigma around mental health issues and anxiety, stress, and depression in the workplace? What kind of different conversations do you think we can be having?
I think certainly that leading by example and kind of if you've been through something yourself, sharing that with the people within your organization or around you is really useful. But then also like we're saying, having those good behaviors in place and kind of going from that point of view. So like maybe always explaining why you're doing something as well. If you're trying to bring somebody along on the journey with you and they're new. So maybe explaining to them that when I did work out of hours, I got burnt out quite quickly. So now I look after myself by maybe stopping work at a reasonable time and going for a walk or something because that helps me to reset my brain in a positive way. But then also helping people to understand what their triggers are, because our triggers for stress are different for each of us. Some of us thrive off things that actually bring others of us out in the most stressful kind of way possible. So I think definitely understanding what your stress triggers are. So is the first sign when you're stressed you snapping at somebody in your family or at work? Or is the first sign of your stress actually working through lunch? Is that when it's starting, but you don't always realize it? For me personally, it's usually when I stop doing my exercise during the working day, because that's something that for me helps me to reset my brain and be more productive. So when
Mm.
I start to avoid that, that's usually when I'm feeling a little bit stressed and a bit like, I've got too much to do and I can't possibly take that break. Yet I'm also aware that logically, I know I should take that break because then I am more efficient afterwards. But it's that first kind of sign for me. So I think becoming aware of your triggers and then maybe working out. So is there a better way to do something? So if your trigger is, for example, doing presentations at work, could you get some training on doing presentations that would mean that you can handle that stress a bit better? Or could you start to look at how you label those feelings when they start to come up? We know that anxiety and excitement are pretty similar in the way physiologically the body kind of identifies those. It's very similar. They both kind of give us a bit of heart racing, a bit of adrenaline in the body, a bit of feeling of kind of on edge and kind of ready to go. And the body's kind of primed to be ready to go. But if we label it as anxiety, it can lead to more negative kind of thought patterns, which then spirals us into worrisome behaviors and then kind of maybe not doing so well, not performing so well in that task. Whereas if we label a label as excitement, then it can mean that we're more excited to do it and we perform better. So again, if we take like a presentation, for example, having to stand up and speak in front of people at work, if we before we go into that presentation label ourselves as feeling, oh, I'm really anxious about delivering this, and what if I don't know what I'm talking about, or what if I stumble over my words, or what if I'm asked a question I don't know how to answer, I feel really anxious about that. You can feel how that sets off those kind of anxious butterflies and that negative side of anxiety. Whereas if you were to sit there and in your head kind of repeat, oh, well, I'm really excited to see what questions are going to come up today. And I'm really excited to share what I'm going to talk about with these people and get these senior leaders on board. I think it's really important that they hear what I've got to say. You can feel again that anxiety isn't there and it's excitement and wanting to share the message. So again, sometimes it's about labeling how those things are going on in our body so that we get the best out of ourselves instead of the worst. So I think anything we can do to train ourselves in that way within an organization or outside it, and things is really useful.
Wow, that's fascinating. I've never heard that connection before, or the fact that anxiety can be and generate the same feelings as and thoughts as excitement. That's really, really interesting. And I'll probably use that again now. I'll think about that
Yeah,
and try and change some of my anxiety, because I think it's important to also, to disclose and to share with people, the fact that somebody asked me, I did a presentation last Friday, and I got some really good feedback. And the person sat next to me on the table said, "Were you nervous then, just before you started?" And I said, "Yes, I always get nervous before a presentation because I think that's, for me, it's a natural part of, I'm wanting it to go well.
yeah,
I've done my preparation. I want to give my best. I want to ensure that people are feel informed, and they leave feeling better informed about things, and that they've enjoyed it." So I said, "Yeah, I still get that sense of nervousness for those reasons." I said, "Even though I've done hundreds and hundreds
yeah.
and hundreds of presentations." So I think it's really good to see the two, and how they can match both anxiety and also in terms of excitement as well.
Yeah,
I
and I
also
think
think it,
it's sorry, Vanessa. I was just going to say the great tip here is go to the bathroom before you do anything like that. If you know something makes you a bit anxious, go to the bathroom and start repeating those "I'm excited, I want to share" kind of messages. And also sometimes if we're feeling anxious, doing something physical, because anxiety and excitement and everything, it dumps adrenaline into the body. So sometimes we need to physically burn off that adrenaline. So believe it or not, I have been known to go into a toilet before a presentation, do some star jumps or some punches in the air or some squats or something like that. Something to discharge some of that negative
mm,
kind of jitteriness from your body. And then you just feel a wee bit calmer going into it. For some people, it's the breathing, deep breathing and that kind of thing
mm,
works. But for me, I'm quite a physical person. So sometimes for me, actually, the punches in the air and the doing a few squats or jumping up and down just kind of settles me a bit better than focusing on the breathing when my brain's too busy, like being too fast. Sometimes my brain's too fast for the breathing to work. So this is another tip that can help to settle you in those moments.
fantastic. That's great. Thank you very much. So, as well as creating and fostering a really positive culture around well-being in the workplace for younger people and for all members of staff, as well as providing the right training for individuals, and also making sure that we look out for one another, what else might we consider doing in terms of supporting younger people in the workplace to ensure that they're feeling good, they're feeling and being cared for, and that they're given access to all the support and training needed?
I think having a great onboarding experience when somebody joins your organization is quite key to then setting them up in the best way. So, and that's not throwing everything at them in the first couple of weeks, because that's like job overwhelm, isn't it? We've all been there, haven't we? Where like in those first few weeks, you come home almost in tears most nights because like your brain's just taken on everything and things, and it's too much too quick. But kind of having that first month or two in an organization where it's quite supportive and drip feeding that information, both on the culture and how to support yourself, and where do you go if you have mental health problems, where do you go if you need a bit of wellbeing support or whatever it might be, but also in terms of what the tasks of the job are, what's expected of you, that kind of thing. So kind of drip feeding that through that first few months of being in an organization, particularly if it's a young person who is new to the world of work. If we're talking about our kind of 17, 18-year-olds kind of just come out of education into the world of work, I think that's really, really key, because, you know, how to set up your office desk, simple things like, when do you go at the toilet? Is that allowed to go at the toilet whenever you want? Or do you have to, finish up with a task that you're doing? Or, can you go at the toilet in a meeting? Those sorts of really basic things, get those kind of shared and kind of supported. But then I think also meeting your young people where they are, because obviously once we have, once we're a bit more experienced, we have different needs, don't we, in an organization. So I always think asking them, you know, what is it that you need support with? Do you want social events? Because not every young person might want social events out of work. They might not be able to attend them. They might have caring needs or something else going on within their lives. But some people do. And some people actually really thrive off having more opportunities to meet in and around and outside work, and thrive off those informal conversations and meetups. So I think certainly asking people and then trying to meet. I mean, obviously, we're never going to be able to make a workplace that fits everybody. But like we say, if it is more a remote workplace, making sure that those touch points are still there, that people can still feel able to have a coffee catch up over nothing on a random day of the week with a manager or a senior person in the organization, just as you would if you met them in the kitchen making a cup of coffee in an office environment, or if you're in a retail space, you pass them, when you're walking around, you would still have a brief conversation, wouldn't you? So trying to make those touch points still exist, however you're working, I think is key.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you touched on a really important point in terms of the induction and the onboarding.
Yeah.
Because it's often a disappointment for some people joining an organization in terms of what they've been sold and how fantastic the company is and how supportive and how generous and so on doesn't match the reality. And I think trying to bridge that gap as much as possible is really key. And that's settling in the onboarding based on the individual's needs and their learning style, is important too. So it's marrying up where possible, the job, enabling them to, take their time in terms of the onboarding process, get to know, ask the questions, because the first few days will, I suppose, generate their experience, for a much longer period in terms of, it's that first impression, isn't it? They've had that at the interview, but does it live up to their reality?
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's key. Like we say, even if that's a buddy as well as your kind of typical onboarding kind of process, somebody who's been there maybe a year or two, so they're not like years away from those first steps, so they still remember it, but they remember those questions that, as an experienced employee, you wouldn't think of, but are quite, important in those first few days and weeks.
And I think trying to, like you say, place yourself in their
Yeah,
shoes. If you've not joined an organization for some considerable time, you'll have forgotten potentially, all the
yeah,
anxieties and all the questions you've got and how challenging it can be for the first few days and weeks. I think one of the most helpful things for me was the mental health first aid
yeah,
training program I attended recently, which was absolutely fantastic, which really heightened my awareness and understanding of mental health issues in the workplace and to spot some of the signs and symptoms. So you can have a great onboarding system. You can have, in terms of a great induction program that takes into account learning needs, takes into account their style and so on, and ensures they've got the right information. It's also important to ensure that the managers and their buddies and mentors have the appropriate training to spot potential signs and symptoms of issues relating to anxiety, stress, and depression, and be able to signpost them on as well and support them in their organisation.
yeah, I totally agree. I think everybody everywhere should. It's almost like first aid, isn't it? We all should. First aid for physical health. We all should be aware of these things, so that if we come across it at work, it doesn't matter what stage or kind of area we work in, we can all then kind of support and know where to kind of help somebody with that.
Yeah, and probably physical first aid and mental first aid as equally as
Yeah,
important
very much
within the
so.
workplace. Yeah, absolutely. So, what are the potential challenges for small businesses in supporting younger peoples at work?
So obviously for small businesses, it can be quite a challenge, can't it? Because we don't always have the same access as a big company to training or to a lot of the employee assistance providers that maybe a bigger company might be able to offer mental health support or access to coaches or therapists or whatever that you might not have as a small business. But this is where RCS can really come and be really, really great, because obviously we've got access to lots of training and lots more health professionals that you can get access to through that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, 62% of people who work in Wales work for a small or medium-sized business, and they don't necessarily have ready access to occupational health or even an employee assistance programme. And that's where we come in. So we're a Welsh government-funded organisation that can support individuals both in terms of access to free therapeutic support and also businesses themselves. So we can provide guidance, consultation, advice and support around well-being in the workplace on all aspects, from policy development, strategy development. We can also conduct health surveys for small businesses to identify what they're currently doing and what they might want to do better or more of. And we can do that via asking their individual employees, whether that's a small business or up to 10 people or even up to 250 people. So we can provide that kind of support, and also access to free training as well. So we've got some fantastic subject experts on a whole range of different wellbeing topics, such as mental health awareness, menopause, sleep, positivity in the workplace, working remotely and working well, sickness, absence and return to work conversations. So a really great wide range of training available to our businesses and to support them. And I think for me, in terms of expectations around employers have changed over the years from, what they want and expect from you. And I think that's turned around to what potential employees want and expect from their employees as well. And what we found when we've been chatting with businesses, if they look after the staff, if they care for the staff, if they take an interest in their staff and they provide the appropriate support and training, they get an awful lot back. They get increased loyalty, they get higher levels of productivity, they get a real heightened sense of motivated staff who'll go the extra mile, who maybe do the extra shift and so on. And I think that's really important in these challenging times where, great staff can be difficult to come by. So to keep hold of those staff, it's very much a case of looking after them as well. Well, that's been really fascinating. Thank you very much. It's been great having a conversation with you, Dr. Beverly Taylor, and I'll hope you'll join us again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.